All right, UPSC aspirants ready for another deep dive. You're going to want to listen closely to this one. It's relevant for both prelims and mains.
Definitely important. And a hot topic, too, India's nuclear energy ambitions.
That's right. We're taking a look at this fresh from the press, straight from the Indian Express,
Yeah.
all about how India is planning to really shake things up and become a major player in the nuclear energy world.
Yeah, it's not just about building more plants. This is about some serious changes to the whole sector.
Big changes. Like what?
Well, I think legal reforms, private investment, the whole nine yards. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman even mentioned it in the recent budget speech, talked about amending the Atomic Energy Act of 1962.
Wow. Okay, so hold on. We're talking about changing the Atomic Energy Act of 1962. That's been around for a while. And she also mentioned the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act,
Yeah.
right? The CLNDA. That's from 2010. So two big pieces of legislation potentially on the chopping block. So why is this such a big deal? I mean, India's been involved in nuclear energy for a long time, right? Was it 1969 with the Tarapur plant?
You're right, India was an early adopter of nuclear energy, but our capacity has kind of stalled out. It's been stuck at around 8,200 milliWs for a while now.
8,200 milliW.
So, well, in that same time, countries like China and South Korea, they've been rapidly expanding their nuclear capacity. They're leaving us in the dust, to be honest.
And we haven't been able to keep up.
The government's had these ambitious targets for years, but we just haven't been able to hit them.
And now the finance minister's talking about 100,000 MW by 2047.
It's a huge goal, a real moonshot.
Is that even possible?
Well, that's why these legal reforms are so important. It's a big part of the plan to try and make that happen. You see, India's nuclear journey, it hasn't been a straight line. It's been a bit more like a roller coaster, to be honest.
Oh,
Yeah.
tell me more about that.
Well, we had some help from Western countries back in the 1950s, but then things got a bit complicated.
What happened?
Well, in 1970, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty came about. That's the NPT. It was meant to limit the spread of nuclear weapons, and it put restrictions on technology transfer. And because India didn't sign it, we were kind of left out in the cold.
We didn't sign the NPT, so what happened then?
Well, then in 74, we had Smiling Buddha, our first nuclear test.
Right, smiling Buddha.
And that led to some global sanctions, And it kind of pushed China and Pakistan closer together on the nuclear front. They started cooperating more.
Interesting. So smiling Buddha had big geopolitical consequences.
It did. And then, of course, we can't forget Operation Shakti in 1998.
Oh yeah, Operation Shakti.
That's when India officially became a nuclear weapon state. It was a major statement to the world.
Yeah, okay, so that's a quick rundown of the history, and it's all pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
But how does this tie into the CLNDA, the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act?
Right.
The one they're talking about amending. From what I understand, it was supposed to protect people if there was a nuclear accident. But it seems like it actually scared away a lot of potential investors.
You got it. And that's a problem. How does that even happen, right?
Exactly.
Well, it comes down to who's held responsible if something goes wrong. Most countries say the plant operator is liable if there's an accident. Makes sense. But India's CLNDA, it pointed the finger at the suppliers.
Oh. So instead of the people running the plant, it's the companies that provided the technology and equipment who are liable.
Exactly. So imagine you're a foreign company, right? And you're thinking about investing in India's nuclear sector. You see this law and you think, wait a minute, I could be on the hook for billions of dollars if something goes wrong. Not exactly a great incentive to invest.
No, not really. So even when the Modi government tried to boost investment in the sector after 2014, this CLNDA was a major roadblock.
A huge roadblock. And it wasn't just the CLNDA either.
Oh, there was more.
The Atomic Energy Act of 1962 that had its own problems.
Really? What was the issue there?
Basically, that act gave the government a complete monopoly over nuclear energy development.
Monopoly.
No private companies allowed. Even Indian companies were excluded.
No competition.
No competition, no fresh ideas, and very little capital coming into the sector. The Department of Atomic Energy, the DAE, they were relying almost entirely on government funding. And that's not always the most efficient way to do things.
So no vibrant ecosystem of innovation, as the article calls it.
Exactly. It's like trying to run a marathon with your shoelaces tied together.
Not very effective.
Sure.
So what's the solution? How do we untangle those shoelaces and get things moving?
Well, the article points to India's space program as a potential model. They talk about ISRO and how they've achieved amazing things by working with the private sector.
That's true. ISR has been incredibly successful, and they've done it by partnering with private companies and leveraging their expertise and resources. Could that work for nuclear energy?
It's an interesting idea. Think about companies like Tata Godrej L&T. They're already making components for nuclear plants. Imagine what they could do if they were allowed to actually build and operate the plants themselves.
And what would the DAE do in this scenario?
The DAE could focus on research and development, pushing the boundaries of nuclear technology while the private sector takes care of the day-to-day operations of the plants.
That sounds like a potential win-win. The DAE gets to focus on cutting-edge research, and the private sector brings its efficiency and capital to the table. But wouldn't it be risky to let private companies handle something as sensitive as nuclear energy?
There are always risks, but the potential rewards are huge. The private sector is often more agile, innovative, and efficient, and they have access to capital that the government simply doesn't. Plus, with the right regulations and oversight, we can mitigate those risks and make sure that safety remains the top priority.
So we're talking about a fundamental shift in how India approaches nuclear energy. No more government monopoly, more private sector involvement, a push for cutting-edge research. It's a pretty bold vision.
It is, and it's not just about energy. It's about economic growth, technological advancement, and even India's standing in the world.
Hold on. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we dive into the global implications, let's take a step back and make sure we're all clear on the challenges here in India. What are the biggest hurdles we need to overcome to actually reach this ambitious 100,000 milliW target?
Well, amending those two acts, the Atomic Energy Act and the CLNDA, that's a good first step. But we also need to address the concerns of foreign investors, streamline the regulations, and create a level playing field for private companies. And of course, there are the technical challenges too.
What do you mean?
Well, we need to make sure we have a reliable supply of uranium, invest in advanced reactor technologies, and make sure our power grid can handle all that extra electricity. It's a complex undertaking.
So it's not just about flipping a switch and suddenly we have all this nuclear power. It's a long-term, multifaceted project. But for our UPSC aspirants listening in, this is pure gold, right?
Absolutely. This is the kind of topic that could easily show up on the mains exam, maybe an essay question about the challenges and opportunities of India's nuclear energy sector, or a question about how legal reforms can help India achieve energy security.
And even for prelims, just knowing the key players, the historical context, all the technical jargon that could give you an edge.
Don't forget about those acronyms, either NPT, CLNDA, DAE. Make sure you know what they stand for and what they mean in this context.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about India's nuclear history, the push for legal reforms, the potential role of the private sector. It's a complex topic, but hopefully we've made it a bit clearer. Now let's shift gears a bit and look at the global implications of India's nuclear ambitions. What happens on the world stage if India actually pulls this off and becomes a major nuclear energy power? All right, so we've talked about what's happening here in India, all the reforms and challenges and the potential for really shaking things up. But things don't happen in a vacuum, right? Especially when it comes to international relations. So let's zoom out a bit. What happens on the world stage if India actually manages to pull this off and becomes a nuclear energy powerhouse?
That's a great question. And you're right about the global context. India's nuclear journey has always been tied to global politics. We're not part of the NPT.
The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right. And that means we've had to kind of forge our own path, which has had its ups and downs.
It's created some tension, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Other countries have been a bit wary of India's nuclear program, especially with our history of nuclear tests and not signing the NPT. So how do we ease those concerns? How do we make sure that other countries see our nuclear ambitions as a good thing and not a threat?
Diplomacy, that's the key. India's been working hard to build trust and show the world that we're committed to responsible nuclear practices, and we've made some progress.
Like what?
Well, the 2005-08 India-US Civil Nuclear Agreement was a big step forward. It showed the world that India was willing to engage with the international community and play by the rules, even without signing the NPT.
Okay, so that was a positive development. But what about nuclear proliferation? That's a huge concern globally. Yeah, and India's nuclear program, even if it's for peaceful purposes, could still raise some eyebrows. How do we convince other countries that we're not going to contribute to the spread of nuclear weapons?
It's a valid concern, and India has been very proactive in addressing it. We've implemented strict export controls, we've signed safeguards agreements with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and we've repeatedly said that we're committed to non-proliferation. It's all about building a track record of responsible behavior and showing the world that we can be trusted with this technology.
So it's like we're saying, look, we're serious about using nuclear energy for good, for development, for a cleaner future. We're not interested in an arms race.
Exactly. And that message is starting to get through. India has been granted an exemption from the Nuclear Suppliers Group, which means we can trade nuclear materials and technology with other countries. That's a big vote of confidence from the international community.
So we're slowly becoming a more integrated player in the global nuclear landscape. But it's not just about easing concerns, right? There are also potential benefits for India on the world stage if we become a leader in nuclear energy.
Absolutely. Think about it. Energy security is a major concern for a lot of countries, especially with climate change and the need to move away from fossil fuels. India, with its vast thorium reserves and growing expertise in nuclear technology, could become a major supplier of clean energy to the world.
That's a powerful position to be in. We could meet our own energy needs and help other countries achieve their climate goals and reduce their reliance on fossil fuels.
Exactly. And that translates into soft power. It boosts India's image on the world stage, strengthens our diplomatic relationships, and gives us more leverage in international negotiations.
It's like we're saying, hey, world, we're not just a rising economic power, we're also a responsible global citizen. We're part of the solution to some of the world's biggest challenges.
Exactly. And that's a message that resonates not just with governments, but with businesses, investors, and people around the world. A strong nuclear energy program can attract foreign investment, stimulate technological innovation, and create new export markets for Indian companies.
So it's a win-win-win. We get energy security, we boost our global image, and we create economic opportunities. But let's be realistic. There have to be some potential challenges on the global front, too. What are some of the things India needs to be prepared for?
Well, the geopolitical landscape is always shifting, and India needs to be ready to navigate those changes. Our relationships with other nuclear powers like China and Pakistan, those are always going to be complex. We need to make sure that our nuclear program doesn't increase tensions or lead to an arms race.
So it's about being assertive but responsible, projecting strength but not being provocative.
Exactly. It requires a nuanced and strategic approach to diplomacy. We need to build strong partnerships with countries that share our values and also engage in dialogue with countries that might have concerns about our nuclear ambitions.
It sounds like a lot of responsibility rests on India's shoulders. We need to balance our own national interests with our commitment to global stability and non-proliferation.
It's a big responsibility, but it's also an incredible opportunity for India to show leadership and contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world. If we can get this right, the benefits for India and for the world could be huge, really transformative.
All right, so we talked about the potential benefits, the diplomatic challenges, the need for a careful and strategic approach. What are the key takeaways here for our UPSC aspirants? How can they use this information to prepare for the exam?
This is definitely important for the mains exam. You could easily see an essay question about the global implications of India's nuclear energy ambitions, or maybe a question asking you to analyze the role of nuclear energy in India's foreign policy.
And for prelims, just knowing the key events, the agreements, the organizations involved, that could all be very helpful.
Make sure you understand the NPT, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the India-US Civil Nuclear Agreement. Those are all potential topics for multiple choice questions.
And don't forget the broader themes. Think about energy security, climate change, soft power, India's role in global governance. These are all connected to India's nuclear ambition.
It's all connected.
Okay, so we've explored the historical context, the domestic reforms, the global implications. But there's one more crucial dimension we need to address before we wrap up: the ethical and social considerations surrounding nuclear energy. Let's dive into that in the final part of our deep dive. Okay, so we've talked about the history, the politics, the economics, the global picture. But there's one more piece of the puzzle, and it's a big one: the ethical and social implications of nuclear energy.
Yeah, that's a crucial part of the discussion. It's something we need to think carefully about, especially for you UPSC aspirants out there.
These are the kind of questions that can really make you think. And they're often the ones that trip people up on the mains exam.
Definitely. You need to show that you can go beyond just memorizing facts and figures. You need to be able to think critically, analyze complex issues, and form your own informed opinions.
Now, when it comes to nuclear energy, there are a lot of complex issues to consider.
Nuclear energy is a powerful technology, and with that power comes a lot of responsibility.
We need to be aware of the potential impacts, both positive and negative, on people and on the planet.
Absolutely.
And I think the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is safety.
Of course.
I mean, the images of Chernobyl and Fukushima, those are hard to forget.
Yeah.
How can we be sure that something like that won't happen again? Especially if we're talking about a massive expansion of India's nuclear program.
That's a question everyone asks, and it's one that the nuclear industry has been working on for decades. The good news is that safety standards and technologies have improved significantly since those disasters. Modern reactors have multiple layers of safety systems, and there's a much greater emphasis on risk assessment, emergency preparedness, and international cooperation.
So the risks are being taken seriously.
Absolutely. But no technology is completely risk-free. So it's about managing those risks and minimizing them as much as possible.
Okay, but what about nuclear waste? It's radioactive, it's dangerous, and we have to store it safely for thousands of years. That's a pretty daunting prospect.
It is. But there has been progress in developing technologies for safe disposal. The most promising solution right now is deep geological repositories.
Deep geological repositories.
Basically, we bury the waste deep underground in stable geological formations.
We bury it.
Yes, these repositories are designed to isolate the waste from the environment for incredibly long periods of time, effectively containing the risk.
So we're talking about burying the problem, literally.
Hmm.
But can we be sure that those repositories will stay safe for centuries or even millennia?
Yeah.
What if there's an earthquake or a leak or some other unforeseen event?
Those are valid concerns, and that's why the process for selecting and designing these repositories is incredibly rigorous. Scientists and engineers spend years studying the geology, the hydrology, the seismology of potential sites to make sure they meet the highest safety standards. And even after a repository is built, it's constantly monitored for any signs of leakage or instability.
So it's not a set and forget it kind of thing.
Definitely not. It's a long-term commitment.
Are there any other options being explored? Maybe something a bit more innovative?
There's ongoing research into other waste management strategies, like reprocessing spent nuclear fuel to extract reusable materials, or developing advanced reactor designs that produce less waste in the first place. It's a complex problem, but scientists and engineers are working on it from multiple angles.
So it's not just about burying the waste and hoping for the best. There's active research and development happening to minimize the risks and explore new possibilities.
Yeah.
But safety and waste disposal are only part of the ethical equation. What about the social implications of nuclear energy? How does it affect communities, especially those living near nuclear plants?
That's an important consideration. Nuclear power plants, while they produce clean energy, can have some localized environmental impacts. There's thermal pollution from the cooling water discharge, the risk of accidents, however small, and the visual impact of the plants themselves. So it's crucial to engage with local communities, address their concerns, and make sure they benefit from the presence of these plants.
So it's not just about building a plant and saying, here's your clean energy deal with it.
Right. It's about respecting the rights and concerns of communities, ensuring their safety, and involving them in the decision-making process.
Transparency, open communication, community engagement, those are all essential.
Absolutely. And then there's the broader issue of public perception. Nuclear energy, despite its potential benefits, still carries a stigma for many people.
It's hard to shake off those Cold War fears of mushroom clouds and radioactive fallout. How do we address those anxieties and create a more informed and rational public discourse around nuclear energy?
It takes time, and it starts with education. We need to explain the science in clear and accessible language, highlight the benefits for climate change mitigation and energy security, and we also need to be upfront about the risks.
So it's about having an honest conversation about the pros and cons of nuclear energy.
Exactly. And that conversation needs to include everyone: scientists, policymakers, industry leaders, and most importantly, the public. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but by working together, we can make informed decisions that benefit everyone.
So for our UPSC aspirants listening in, what's the key takeaway here? How should they be thinking about this as they prepare for their exams?
Remember, the UPSC is looking for critical thinking. They want to see that you can grapple with complex issues and form your own opinions. So when you're studying nuclear energy, don't just focus on the technical aspects. Think about the ethical implications, the social impacts, the different perspectives. Engage with the material, ask tough questions, and develop a nuanced understanding of this multifaceted issue.
It's not just about what you know, it's about how you think. It's about showing that you can approach a complex issue like nuclear energy with sensitivity, insight, and a commitment to ethical considerations.
Exactly.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into India's nuclear energy ambitions. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the history to the latest developments, from the technical details to the ethical dilemmas. It's a fascinating and complex topic, and we hope this discussion has given you a solid foundation for further exploration.
Remember, this is a field that's constantly evolving. So stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions. And as always, we encourage you to read the full article from the Indian Express, which you can find in the show notes below.
And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future deep dives, please leave us a message. We love hearing from our listeners, and your feedback helps us make the show better.
So until next time, keep those brains buzzing, keep those pens scribbling, and keep striving for excellence in your UPSC journey.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your fellow aspirants. Every little bit helps us spread the knowledge and empower the next generation of Indian leaders.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.